Hello my dear friends, you're on the MilitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of May of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kyiv because the most important and interesting updates are coming from this area. Today the Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz, the Prime Minister of Poland Donald Tusk, the President of France Macron, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom Keir Starmer came to Kyiv, came to Zelensky with the purpose to discuss the possibility of a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. So this is exactly the moment when these leaders came to Kyiv, came to Zelensky. Later they had very interesting and very long meeting. This is the photo from this meeting, and this is exactly the moment when these five were talking about common position, because before doing any step further they should have found a solution, found a common position that they needed to provide to Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America. And according to information we have, later today they had a call with Trump where they provided him the European common position regarding this 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. And according to information we have, the President of the United States of America accepted this plan. He accepted this plan, and furthermore some sources from states reported that if Moscow rejects the initiative, new sanctions could be imposed against Russia by the United States of America, by the European Union, and of course by the United Kingdom. So it's very difficult to understand what exactly these five were planning to do, were trying to do, but one thing we know for sure, that according to information, according to insights we have, these five were planning, and maybe have already done, have issued an ultimatum to the Russian Federation and to Vladimir Putin with the purpose to force him to accept this 30-day ceasefire, to accept the demands of the European Union, and so on. Of course, this part with these leaders, with their meeting in the Kyiv, with the statements of press secretary of the Russian Federation, is just something on top. It's just something that is on top of the most important updates and events that are going to happen. Because according to information we have, Stephen Witkoff is going to present 22-point Ukraine peace proposal to Putin. And most likely he is going to do this during the next 24 hours, because according to Zelensky and according to the Western countries, there are planning to start the 30-day ceasefire on Monday, so the day after tomorrow. So Russia has just 24 hours to make a decision. NBC News reports that Stephen Witkoff is preparing to deliver a 22-point peace proposal to Russian President Vladimir Putin aimed at de-escalating the war in Ukraine. The proposed plan reportedly includes a 30-day ceasefire and a key concessions aligned with Kremlin demands and commitment that the United States would not support Ukraine's bid to join NATO. NATO is not the most important thing that Russia wants, obviously, but for some reason the Western countries believe that this is the most important paragraph. Anyway, Ukrainians and the European countries this evening have issued ultimatum to the Russian Federation. As for now, we still haven't received anything from Putin. As for now, we still continue receiving reports of Putin's meetings with different leaders from the entire world, from Serbia, with China, with Vietnam, with many other countries, including lots of African countries. So we see that Putin makes the situation looks like he doesn't care about everything that is happening right now in Kyiv, and probably this makes the European countries very nervous, and we understand why. Anyway, during the day we got a lot of statements from Kyiv. Macron: deploying thousands of Western troops to Ukraine isn't a viable security strategy. But the thing is that the European countries have begun talking about this. UK, US to step up military aid to Ukraine if Putin refuses to ceasefire, says Starmer. So more weapon Ukraine should expect if Russia probably doesn't accept this issued ultimatum. A full and unconditional ceasefire for at least 30 days must begin on Monday, May 12th, and we demand this from Russia. We demand this from Russia. Key words, and probably the most important, demand. So as you can see, the European Union and Russia and Ukraine still try to handle negotiations from the position of force, but telling the truth, it's very difficult to find any force from Ukrainian side. So the next 24 hours are going to be very important, but obviously 24 hours it's too much. So let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue offensive operation. And as for the updates that we have received during the previous 24 hours, we see that the Russians managed to do this. They managed to break Ukrainian lines in the vicinity of Bahatyr and Alexeyevka, and based on geolocations and videos that we got today, we have adjusted the map, as you can see. In this video, for example, that was published, by the way, by the Ukrainian sources, we can see lots of attacks, several attacks from Ukrainian side with FPV drones on the edge positions of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. So based on this video and based on several geolocations, we have adjusted the map. One of the episodes of this video took place in this part. Several episodes took place in the most eastern part of the settlement. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored probably 10% of the settlement of Bahatyr in Russian favor. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian defense to the east of the settlement of Alexeyevka and answer the most eastern part of this village as well. We have geolocation. This video was published by the 46th Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers in this area. Based on this video, we have adjusted this part of the map. So once again, as you can see, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter both villages at the same time, the settlement of Bahatyr from the southeast and the village of Alexeyevka from the east. Currently, there are very heavy clashes, and most likely the Russians will increase their pressure at the beginning of the 11th of May of 2025, when ceasefire ends. Now let's move further. While the Russians are fighting with the Ukrainians on the eastern outskirts of both villages, another group of Russian forces is trying to outflank the Ukrainians in the settlement of Alexeyevka from the north. At least several mappers reported about this during the previous 24 hours. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the fields and these fields and to get as close as possible to the settlement of Alexeyevka from the north. Obviously, this is not like an operation of one day. Obviously, it will take time, but the Russians are getting closer and closer to the final victory for these two settlements. When talking about the Novopavlovka or the Dnipro direction, as you can see, we have a lot of icons in this area as well, and according to these icons, we see that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians currently are trying to concentrate as many as possible soldier units, vehicles along this tree line. So basically, this is the final tree line before the border between Dnipro and Donetsk regions. So the Russians are trying to take these, let's say, tree line, these positions in full length with the purpose to concentrate as many as possible soldiers along this area, and as soon as the Russians are able to concentrate a critical mass, obviously they will continue moving further with the purpose to attack the settlement of Novopavlovka using broad front line attack. So obviously after the 11th of May, if the Russians reject the ultimatum of Ukrainian side in the European countries, most likely the Russians probably the next week will continue advancing in this area. So we have lots of changes, we have lots of mappers updates, so we see that the situation in this area remains very difficult for the Ukrainians. Furthermore, we see that the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlements of Novonikolaevka, and there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement of Novosergeyevka. Today we got another geolocation published by the Ukrainian side, where we can see how Russians were moving through the settlement, clearing one building after another, and how Ukrainians ambushed the Russians with FPV drones. Several explosions, several wounded soldiers from the Russian side. This episode took place exactly in this place, and based on this video we have adjusted the map by coloring additional part of the settlement of Sergeyevka under complete Russian control. We see that the Russians continue offensive, and the settlement of Novosergeyevka is the village that almost located on the territory of the border. So if Russians take this village under complete control, this is going to mean that the Russians enter the Dnipro region itself. We see that due to all these activities, due to this Russian pressure, we see that the Dnipro region is the task number one for the Russians to have stronger positions, probably during possible negotiations with Ukrainians. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kliban-Bykska direction. During the previous video, we discussed the situation in this area, that the Russians improved their positions in the southeastern direction, and the Russians have almost answered the settlement of Romanovka. We have already discussed that the Russians are trying to attack Ukrainian positions in the direction of Yablunovka and Alexandra Kalinova, and we see that the situation for Ukrainians is very difficult. Furthermore, today we got several reports from pro-Ukrainian sources, and Ukrainians reported, for example, today that, for example, during the previous 24 hours, several Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups were already discovered and spotted on the southwestern outskirts of the settlement by the name of Yablunovka. So, according to information we have, several sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed force of Russian Federation managed to answer this territory. So, Ukrainians, as we understand, doesn't have strong control inside of this red line. So, everything that is between this red line and, let's say, positions of the armed forces of Ukraine and positions of the Russian forces is no longer under complete Ukraine control. So we believe that everything in this red line is already a contested area, or the area that is covered with the fog of war. So the situation escalates, and we see that Russian offensive is gaining momentum, and obviously during the next several days the map would be changed significantly and obviously in Russian favor. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Chasov Yar Konstantinovka direction. The situation here remains the same. The Russians are trying to improve their positions with the purpose to cut this pocket. As for now, there are still very heavy clashes and without any changes on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published lots of videos how they were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with drones, and as you can see, without changes on the ground. But obviously, after the 11th of May, if the Russians reject the Ukrainian ceasefire, Ukrainian proposal, more precisely Ukrainian ultimatum, the Russians will resume their attacks. Now let's talk about the Sivas direction. The Russians are getting closer and closer to take the settlement of Grigorovka under complete control. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with artillery. And based on this video and based on these episodes, we see what the Russians are planning. First of all, the Russians established complete fire and artillery control over this square. And most likely the Russians are trying to destroy everything that Ukrainians are trying to send in this pocket with the purpose to stabilize the situation. So that is why we expect that Ukrainians will lose these possibilities in the very near future, and as soon as it happens, the Russians will continue offensive with the purpose to take the settlement of Grigorovka under complete control. This forest and these tree lines is very important for the Russians. They need to take this territory under complete control, and which is the most important, the Russians need to maintain and to shorten their lines on the Kremenaya forest direction till the settlement of Verkhnekamensk along this red line. If the Russians are able to do this, then we can start counting days before the Battle of Seversk begins. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Liman direction, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their position significantly. We have already discussed the situation on the ground in this area, and nothing have changed since the morning of the 9th of May of 2025. And as for now, we see that the Russians are moving further in the northern direction with the purpose to take under control several villages to the north of Russian, let's say, Liman flower, and the Russians are trying to create a buffer. So as for this stage of offensive operation, the Russians are trying to take under control everything inside of this red area. So the settlements of Glushenkova, Redkadub, Novy Mir, Grekovka is the primary target for the Russians. This will allow the Russians to create a buffer zone. They need this buffer zone with the purpose to either to continue offensive operation further in the northwestern direction, or to begin full-scale offensive operation in the southern direction towards the settlement by the name of Liman. But due to the situation in Seversk and due to the situation that the Russians are advancing in both areas almost with the same speed, with the same rate, we expect that the Russians first of all will try to turn in the southern direction, and as soon as the Russians are able to get the Seversky Donetsk river, then the Russians will turn to the in the northwestern direction, and they will finish with the Barova direction. So now the Russians are planning to cut these territories into many pieces and then to handle with every single piece separately. Now let's talk about the northern Kupiansk direction. We have several interesting geolocations, and probably this is the first one. First of all, I would like to point your attention where is the position of this geolocation that we are going to talk about. We haven't received anything from this area probably since the 2023 or so. So here we can see how the Russians managed to discover a group of Ukrainian forces, a pretty huge group, as you can see, more than 20 soldiers that were moving towards the border with the Russian Federation. The Ukrainians were planning to answer the territory of Russia, probably with the purpose to carry out several sabotage operations, but the Ukrainians were discovered in this area and destroyed as a result of artillery fire and FPV drone strikes. So very interesting reconnaissance operation that Ukrainians were trying to carry out, and most likely the Ukrainians were planning to get an answer to a very simple question, whether the Russians are planning their offensive operation in this area or not. But due to the fact that Ukrainians haven't managed even to cross the border, I believe that Ukrainians realized that most likely the Russians indeed have some plans for this territory. Furthermore, let's talk about the northern directions, about the settlement of Tevkina. There are very heavy clashes in this area, and most likely by the 5th day of offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed just to ruin the Russian defense, the Russian first layer of defense, first local layer of defense. We're not talking about global layer. Obviously, there are still lots of job to do. The thing is that starting of the 10th of May of 2025, the Ukrainians published lots of videos where we can see infantry. For example, in this video we can see a group of Ukrainian soldiers. Obviously we're talking not about 5 or 10 soldiers. Just on this episode most likely we can count up to 20 or 30 soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine that were heading towards the settlement of Novoput. Maybe even more, maybe up to 100 soldiers from the armed forces of Ukraine were moving in the northern direction, most likely with the purpose to occupy and to take under complete control the settlement of Novoput, with the purpose to expand their positions and to increase the territory under complete control during the next several days. So this is the first proof that confirms that the first stage of Ukraine offensive operation has ended, and now the Ukrainians began using infantry with the purpose to expand their positions. When talking about the settlement of Tevkina during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The sources reported that there were very heavy clashes, but once again without proofs, without any geolocations that can confirm additional progress on the ground. As for the most northern part of Ukraine, nothing happened, a regular situation, but for now it's regular, but most likely by the time you're gonna watch this video, the ceasefire will be finished, and most likely the Russians will start something huge. And that's it for today. MilitarySummary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.